Hey guys, my name is John. This is NAR Outdoors. We've reached a little bit of a warm spell, so I'm taking this opportunity to get started and hopefully finish sealing up the bed rails. So there are a couple tools, if you choose to partake upon this, that you may need. Screwdriver for the scrivets. I'm going to see if this 8mm socket works to pop the little plastic bits out. You may want a panel trim tool. And then I have some aluminum foil tape and sikaflex 221 to actually seal some of the gaps. So let's get started. We're going to start by removing a couple things. All right, first up, these scrivets. There are 4 on each side, 2 in the middle and 1 on each end. Pretty straightforward. You back out the central plastic screw, and then sometimes you can wiggle them out. Sometimes the screw comes out. Sometimes you gotta push the actual expander part out, and sometimes you need the panel trim tool. I'm gonna save these for reuse. So as you can see, back, middle, and front. Sometimes the screw portion doesn't want to come out, and if you reach behind and squeeze it here, it'll unthread. Next up, we're going to pull out these. I believe it's as simple as getting a tool underneath, like your panel trim tool, and they flex out. So there are 3 on each side, front, middle, back. Wash, rinse, repeat on both sides. All right, so there's 2 clips here, and the best way to access them is through the light. There are 2 here, and you can get to them from underneath. One about here, and then there's one here, but it's beside it's inside the fender, and then it kind of staggers back and forth with inside the fender, outside the fender, inside the fender, and outside the fender. And there's 2 here that are kind of hard to get access to. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to remove the tailgate or the tail light and work my way forwards, trying to get these loosened. I've got my tool, which is going to help, and then I've got some pliers that I may reach in and squeeze the little clips. But first, I'm going to take off my tail light. And to give myself a little working room, I'm actually going to see if I can get this part lifted up a little bit first. The socket trick actually works pretty well. The 3/8" drive actually slots over this little clip pretty well and closes it up. And again, this is where it gets tricky. I can't get access to the underside of these easily. So I'm going to use this, apply some force sideways to see if I can unlatch the legs of them. Just being careful not to screw up my paint or anything. There we go. There's one break off. See if I can epoxy the back end. That's the risk of doing this. Good. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this epoxied back in. I'm gonna do that off camera, just some 5-minute epoxy. And I'll come back and we'll prep this and start the process. I'm also gonna go ahead and take off the other bed rail. So a little bit of this stuff, I'm gonna let that dry. We'll work on the other side, get that off, and then I'll start prepping. All right, we're gonna do a 2-stage clean, a little surface cleaner. And then alcohol as a degreaser. You do have to be careful with the alcohol because the sikaflex will not cure in the presence of alcohol. So let this sit for a long time. Although technically I'm really trying not to bond the sikaflex to anything alcohol. I'm actually trying to bond the sikaflex between the plastic and this tape we're going to put on. Another little bit for me is I'm going to install these. These are part of my tailgate seal. And they're going to go and fill in this gap right here from the digital twin tailgate seal. So that'll be something you may not need to do. Right. So this is ducting tape or duct sealing tape for HVAC stuff. I just got cheap stuff from Amazon. Not terribly worried as long as it sticks and stays sticked. The idea behind using this is it's going to seal a lot of these holes and minimize any extra gap more so than's needed. So the pieces that go in are going to puncture through this tape and then seat. And then it's going to be filled just the absolute minimum space required outside of these little pieces that puncture through. So I'm also going to try to keep an eye out for the stake pocket. I guess they're stake pockets, whatever you want to call these. I'm not actually going to cover those up, or I'm going to take it off because the camper I'm getting actually has a special adapter for that purpose. This stuff tears pretty darn easily. You can also cut it with a knife. Whatever you might want to do. It's going to work fine. And while I am sometimes a bit of a perfectionist, I do not think that this matters that much in terms of the edges, because the edges are all going to be covered up, ragged edges. It's all going to be covered up by the bed rail cap. I guess they're not really bed rails, they're more bed rail caps. And this is not a new concept or process. Tacoma guys have been doing it for years. I'm sure there's some Ranger guys that have done it too. Be careful, this tape is technically metal and very thin, so it can be sharp. So what I'm actually going to use is use a rag to kind of burnish it down and get the edges pressed down so that I don't cut myself. Because no one wants to bleed for their truck. I will if I have to, but no one wants to. All right, and we'll just do an overlapping strip right there. I'm going to figure out where those holes are and go ahead and poke them through. And I suppose it's actually not that important to seal these ones on the outside of the rail because they technically go into the fender area, but I guess it might keep stuff from coming up from the inside. Burnish that down. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to leave these holes. I'll poke through them later. Let me get some sikaflex. I'm going to find the opportune locations to apply. Who knows? This may be excess. I may not need to do this. It may not be a problem. Once the camper shell gets put on, I'm not taking it off. So let me do this instead rather than having to go back and fix a potential problem. So as you can see, just mostly focus on getting these holes covered up. We're losing light quick, so I need to get moving. Right now, my plan is to put a bead along the outer edge, along the inner edge, and put a bead along the outer edge and along the inner edge of this, and then marry them together. And this stuff is surprisingly thick. I did not expect this to be this thick. I think for the next bed rail, now that I've seen how this goes on, I'm going to focus most of my attention in this gap here and get most of the sikaflex in that gap, because I don't think anything I put on the inside of the rail actually mattered. I think there's actually a gap that it's held off a couple millimeters on the side. So live and learn. Definitely get a good cleanup with rubbing alcohol, so we should have some of that on hand. And so I've got a little tiny bit of squeeze out there, which is actually very reassuring because it means that it's getting in there pretty good. Just clean that up, a little tiny bit of alcohol, and I think we're good. Still get a little bit of sunlight here, but not at any of the other sites. So I'm gonna put a little bead from the inside, and I think we're gonna call it done. But there you have it. Bed caps on, bed caps off. I do not know if this is the right way to do it. I don't know if there is a right way to do it. This is the way I did it. I'm gonna put my skirvets back in. I'm gonna call it a day. It's probably better than nothing, at least. Till next time.
No roar.